The last thing Bang Woo-jun remembered before everything went dark was the sound of his phone ringing on the passenger seat and his wife's name on the screen. He didn't answer it. 3 seconds later, a car that had been following him since exit 7 on Route 206 came up on his left side and pushed him off the road like he was nothing, like he was a piece of paper someone wanted out of the way. The ditch swallowed his car at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, and by the time anyone found him, the other car was already gone. No plates, no witnesses, nothing but wet road and a man who should have died and didn't. He didn't die, but he didn't wake up either. At least, that's what everyone thought. 14 weeks later, Angel Fosters walked into room 4C at Princeton Medical Center at the start of hour 11 of a 12-hour shift, carrying a cup of coffee she had not taken a single sip of yet, and pulled the chair close to the bed of Bang Woo-jun the way she had been doing. Every day for 3 weeks, she sat down. She looked at him, she said out loud, to a man who the entire medical floor had already written off in their heads. "Okay, Mr. Bang, it's me again. You want to hear something embarrassing? I matched with a man on Hinge last night who listed his hobby as manifesting. I am 32 years old. I did not go to nursing school for 6 years to manifest. I went so I could afford my own apartment and so my mother would stop asking me about grandchildren at every single family dinner." She laughed at herself. She checked his vitals the way her hands knew how to do without her brain fully. Participating, pulse, oxygen, IV line. She noted everything on the chart. Then she sat back down. His name was Trevor. He had a photo with a boat that I'm pretty sure wasn't his boat. I could tell by how he was standing next to it. Like he was trying to look casual, but he was actually terrified someone was going to ask him to drive it. She paused, looked at him. "I didn't go on the date before you judge me. I have some standards. They're low, but they're there." She sipped her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. This is where you need to stop and subscribe if you haven't already. Because what happens in this room over the next few weeks is going to make your jaw drop. Like, comment, and subscribe. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. Angel had taken over Woo-jun's care 3 weeks earlier when the nurse who had him before transferred to another floor. Nobody gave her a long briefing. They handed her the chart, told her he was stable, and moved on. The hospital ran like that, full to capacity. Short on time, everybody doing the most they could with what they had. She was used to it. 8 years as a rehabilitation nurse had made her good at filling in the blanks on her own. She read his chart the first night and sat with him for a few minutes in silence, the way she did with all her patients before she said anything, just to get the feel of the room. The room felt heavy, not sad exactly, more like unfinished, like something in it was still waiting. She started talking to him that first night just to fill the quiet. It wasn't a clinical decision. It wasn't even a conscious one. She just opened her mouth and things came out, the way they did when she was alone. Because after 11 hours of talking to people who needed things from her, talking to someone who couldn't need anything was the closest thing she had to rest. By the second week, she was looking forward to it. She told him things she didn't tell anyone else. Not because she was lonely, although she was a little, but because the room had a quality to it that her apartment didn't. The quiet in her apartment felt like absence. The quiet in 4C felt like someone paying attention. She told him about the patient on the 3rd floor, who had been in recovery for 6 months, finally walked to the window on his own 2 feet last Tuesday, and stood there in the sunlight like he was seeing it for the first time. She told him about the resident who cried in the supply closet after a hard case, and how she'd stood outside the door and pretended not to hear, because some people need to fall apart privately, and the kindest thing you can do is let them. She told him about her father, who left when she was 9, and how she'd spent years being angry about it, and then one day she just wasn't anymore. Not because she forgave him exactly. More like she realized she was spending energy on someone who wasn't spending any on her, and that felt like bad math. Woo-jun lay completely still through all of it, but something in the room shifted when she talked. Something that she couldn't name and didn't try to. On day 3 of talking to him, she noticed it for the first time. She had said something, A joke about the hospital's coffee machine, which had been broken for a week and a half and had made the entire nursing staff collectively miserable, and something in his face changed, barely, just around the eyes. A relaxation so small it probably had a medical explanation that had nothing to do with humor. Probably. She looked at him for a second longer than usual. Then she kept talking. That night she called her mother, Claudette, from the parking garage before she drove home. Claudette picked up on the second ring, the way she always did, as if she had nothing else to do in the world except wait for Angel's call, which they both knew wasn't true, but was one of the things Angel loved most about her. "Mama," Angel said, "I think my coma patient laughed at my joke." There was a pause. Then Claudette said, "Baby, you need sleep and a social life." In that order. "I'm serious." Something moved on his face. "Angel, I know how it sounds. It sounds like you are talking to an unconscious man about your dating life, and now you think he has opinions. That's what it sounds like." Angel leaned her head back against the seat. "When you say it like that, go home. Sleep. Eat something that isn't from the vending machine." She went home. She slept 4 hours. She ate a bowl of cereal standing over the sink at 6 a.m. She went back to 4C. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Bang Woo-joon had been awake since week 3 of his hospitalization. Not physically. His body was still. His muscles had stopped responding the way they should after the trauma of the crash. But his mind had come back to him slowly, like a signal finding its frequency, until one morning he was simply there again. Present, aware, listening. He had lain in that bed, in that dark behind his eyelids. And the first clear thought he had was not about the pain or the hospital or even his daughter. It was about the phone call, his wife's name on the screen, the car that came out of nowhere. The way neither of those things felt like a coincidence once he was conscious enough to put them next to each other. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just lay there and thought about everything he knew and everything he now understood. And he made a decision in the quiet of that room that he was going to stay exactly where he was until he had what he needed. What he needed was information. What he got, starting 3 weeks into his stay, was Angel Foster. He heard her before he had any sense of her. Her voice was the first thing, low and warm and completely unguarded in a way that people's voices almost never are when they think someone might be listening. She walked in, adjusted his IV, checked his chart, and then sat down and started talking to him like he was an old friend she was catching up with after a long time apart. He didn't know what to make of her at first. By the end of the first week, he had stopped trying to make anything of her and just listened. She was funny. Not performed funny. Not trying to be funny. The kind of funny that comes from paying close attention to the world and noticing all the things that don't quite add up. She noticed everything. She talked about her patients without using their names, out of some private code of dignity she seemed to hold herself to. But the way she described people made them completely real. She talked about the hospital, the way someone talks about a place they have complicated feelings for, frustrated by it, proud of it, unable to imagine not being there. She talked about herself with an honesty that was almost startling. Not self-pity, just accuracy. She knew who she was. She knew what she wanted. She knew where the gaps were between those two things, and she talked about the gaps the same way she talked about everything else. Directly, without dressing it up. He had spent 20 years in rooms full of people who dressed everything up. She was different. And then one Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd week, she walked in and sat down and said, before she even looked at his chart, "Your wife came in today." He went very still, stiller than usual, which was difficult because he was already completely still. She was on the phone the whole time she was in here. I wasn't trying to listen, I was charting at the desk, but she has one of those voices that carries. She said something about the end of the fiscal quarter. I don't work in finance, so maybe that's normal. Maybe people just say that. A pause. It didn't feel normal. She picked up his chart, made her notes, set it back down. "I'm probably wrong," she said. "I'm tired. Tired people see things." She wasn't wrong, and he knew, lying there with her voice in the air and his wife's words sitting heavy in his chest. That whatever was happening in this room was no longer just about survival. Something else was beginning. He just didn't have a word for it yet. The thing about Hana Woo-jun was that she was very good at looking like a grieving wife. She wore it the way some women wear a coat. Put it on at the door, took it off when she thought no one was watching. Angel had seen enough families in that hospital to know the difference between people who were falling apart and people who were managing an image. Hana managed. Every Tuesday and Thursday, exactly 20 minutes, always dressed like she had somewhere more important to be afterward. She never asked the nurses how he was responding to stimulus. She never asked if he seemed comfortable. She stood at the foot of his bed, looked at him with an expression that was designed to look like grief but landed closer to calculation, and left. Angel noted it the way she noted everything, quietly, without making it mean something yet. But it was the third Thursday that she couldn't shake. She was charting at the nurse's station when Hana came off the elevator. Not unusual. What was unusual was the man with her. Tall, expensive suit, the kind of leather portfolio that looked really costly. They stood in the corridor outside 4C for 4 minutes before Hana went in alone. The man stayed outside. Angel watched him from the station. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't sit down. He just stood there with the portfolio under his arm like he was waiting for a signature. Angel went in to check vitals 20 minutes later. After Hana had left, she did her checks. She sat down. She said, "Your wife brought someone today, not a doctor, not a friend. A man with a portfolio and the energy of someone who charges by the hour. He waited outside while she was in here." She paused. "I'm not saying anything. I'm just telling you what I saw." She looked at Woo-jun's face. Still, completely still. "Okay," she said, moving on. "You want to hear about my morning? I had a patient on the second floor try to bribe me with a Chick-fil-A gift card to let him have his phone back, which his doctor had specifically said no screens for another week. And I want you to know it was a $50 gift card." I held firm. "But it cost me something emotionally." She stayed another 40 minutes. When she left, she didn't notice that the micro-movement around his eyes had become something else. Something more deliberate. He was working out how long he had, and whether the woman who just told him about his wife's visitor was someone he could trust. He already knew the answer. He'd known it for days. He just needed to figure out what to do with it. Seo-kyun came on a Wednesday. He always came on Wednesdays, always alone. Always stood near the window, like the window gave him something to look at that wasn't the man in the bed. Angel had clocked him by his second visit. Attorney, she'd decided. Not because of the watch, although the watch was a factor. Because of the way he read the room when he walked in. Quickly, professionally, like he was assessing risk. People who assessed rooms like that were either in law enforcement or law, and he didn't have the posture of a cop. She knocked before entering on the third Wednesday he was there. He turned from the window. She said she just needed to check the IV and she'd be out of his way. He nodded. She did her checks. And in the 2 minutes she was in that room, she heard him say very quietly to Woo-jun in Korean 3 sentences she didn't understand, but she understood his tone. The tone was, "We're running out of time." She left without saying anything. That night she said to Woo-jun, "Your attorney was here again. He said something to you in Korean. I don't speak Korean, so I can't help you there. But whatever he said, he looked like a man trying to hold water in his hands." She leaned back in the chair. "I don't know what's going on in your life, Mr. Bang. I don't need to know. But something is happening outside this room, and it keeps walking into it. And I'm not going to pretend I don't notice." She stayed quiet for a moment. "I hope you have people you can trust," she said, not to fill the silence, just because she meant it. In the bed, very slowly something shifted in Woo-jun's chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Iris arrived on a Friday in the middle of Angel's afternoon rounds. Angel didn't know who she was at first. Young, early 20s, Korean. Wearing the expression of someone who had been holding themselves together across a very long flight, and was not going to be able to hold it much longer. She stood in the doorway of 4C, and Angel almost redirected her because visiting hours didn't start for another 40 minutes. Then she looked at the girl's face and stepped aside. Iris went to her father's bedside and sat down and didn't perform anything. She just cried. Quietly, without making it about how she looked, the way young people cry when they forget anyone is watching. She held his hand and talked to him in low Korean, and after a while she switched to English. Maybe because she ran out of Korean words for what she was feeling, or maybe because she'd grown up between two languages and grief didn't always stay in one of them, she said. I'm not going to let her have everything. I want you to know that. I'm not going to let her. Angel brought her water and a box of tissues and left them on the bedside table without a word. An hour later, Iris came out, and her eyes were red but her chin was up, and she stopped in the corridor and said, "You're the one who talks to him." Angel said, "The nurses said someone on this floor talks to him every day. Not medical stuff, just talks to him." She looked at Angel steadily. "Was you?" Angel said, "I do talk to my patients, yes." Iris looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you. He's not a man who had a lot of people who just talk to him without wanting something." She picked up her bag. "I think he would have liked that." She left. Angel stood in the corridor for a moment, feeling something she couldn't name press up against the inside of her chest. She went back to 4C. She sat down. She said, "Your daughter was here. She's remarkable. She has your eyes. I've seen the photo on your chart from before. She has your eyes and her own backbone, and she is going to be fine." A pause. "I thought you should know that." In the bed, Woo-Jun heard every word, and something that had been locked very tight inside him for 19 weeks came slightly loose. It happened on a Thursday night, late, when the floor had gone quiet and Angel was doing her last round before the overnight team came on. She was moving through her checks when she caught it. Not a micro movement this time. A full, controlled blink. One beat, deliberate. Too deliberate to be anything the body does on its own. She stopped. She looked at him. His face was completely still again. But the blink had happened. She had seen it. Her hands were steady because her hands were always steady at work. That was a decision she had made years ago, and her body had learned it. But something in her chest was not steady at all. She set down the chart. She pulled the chair close. She looked at him for a long time, and then she said, quietly enough that it wouldn't carry past the door, "If you can hear me, and I mean actually hear me, and I mean this is a real question, and not me talking to myself in a hospital room at 11 p.m. If you can hear me, blink twice." Silence, 4 seconds, 5, 6, 2 blinks. She put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled, and she let them because there was nobody to see it, and she was not going to waste energy pretending she wasn't feeling what she was. Feeling, she sat there with her hand over her mouth for 10 full seconds. Then she took her hand down. She breathed. She said, Okay, I need you to listen to me very carefully because I don't know what this is yet. And I don't know who knows what, and I don't know if this room is safe. So we are going to be very calm. I am going to sit here. You are going to keep being still. And nobody is going to know that I know. Not until I understand what's happening. Do you understand? 1 blink. She sat with him for another hour. She talked in a lower voice than usual. She asked him small, careful questions, and he answered with 1 blink or 2. By the time she handed over to the overnight nurse, she had 3 things she knew for certain. He was conscious. He was choosing this. And he had been listening to her for 5 weeks. She drove home in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls. She sat in her car in the parking lot of her building for 15 minutes before she went inside. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat at her kitchen table in the dark, and she thought about what a person does when they find out that the room they've been talking in, like it, was private, was never quite as private as they thought. And then she thought about everything she'd told him. The Hinge date, her father, the Pinterest board. She put her head down on the kitchen table. "Oh no," she said to no one. Then she thought about the attorney who looked like he was running out of time. The wife with the portfolio man. Iris saying, "I'm not going to let her have everything." She picked her head up. She thought about it differently. She went to bed at 2 a.m. She was back at the hospital by 7. She walked into 4C that morning different from every other morning. Not visibly. She still knocked, Still carried her charts, still had a coffee she was behind on drinking. But something in the way she sat down had changed. She wasn't filling silence anymore. She was talking to someone. She pulled the chair close. She looked at him. I've been thinking about this all night, and I've landed somewhere very specific. I am not going to panic. I am not going to report anything until I understand what I'm actually looking at. And I am not going to pretend last night didn't happen. She folded her hands in her lap. But I do need you to understand something. I have been in this room for 5 weeks telling you things that I have not told another living person. So whatever this is, whatever you're doing and why, I need to know I wasn't just a useful accident. She looked at him steadily. 1 blink for accident, 2 blinks for something else. A pause, long enough that she felt the first edge of doubt. 2 blinks, she exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. Okay. She looked at the ceiling for a second, then back at him. I'm going to keep coming in here the same as always. Same time, same routine, nothing different on the outside. But I need you to work with me. If something happens in this room that I should know about, I need a signal. Something I can notice without it being obvious. She watched his face. His fingers moved, just barely, a shift toward her side of the bed. Fingers, she said. Okay, I can watch for that. She stayed her usual time. She talked about ordinary things, a patient on the 2nd floor who was learning to walk again, the cafeteria's rotating soup menu, a phone call with Claudette the night before, where her mother had asked, again, whether Angel was seeing anyone. She talked the way she always talked, but underneath it she was paying attention to every breath in that room, every shift of air, every small signal his body was learning to give her. When she left, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She didn't have to wait long for Dr. Kwon to find her. It was the following Monday. She was in the corridor outside the supply room, restocking her cart, when he appeared beside her with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been waiting for the right moment. He said, "Nurse Foster, do you have a few minutes?" She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them said anything for a second. She said, "Is this about room 4C?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Then yes, I have a few minutes." They sat in his office with the door closed, and he told her everything. Not the way people tell things when they're trying to manage what you understand. He told her the whole of it, start to finish, with the directness of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been given permission to set it down. The crash was not an accident. In the week before it happened, Woo Jun had discovered something. Hana had been in conversations with 2 members of the Sung Capital Board, men who had wanted to dismantle the company and sell its divisions for years and had never been able to, because Woo Jun held the controlling vote. When the board strategy stopped looking viable, the conversation changed. Someone made a different kind of plan, and on a Tuesday night at 2 a.m. on Route 206, that plan almost worked. Woo Jun survived with a head injury severe enough to explain unconsciousness, and vague enough to make a long-term coma medically plausible. When he came back to himself, slowly over the first 2 weeks, he didn't announce it. He had one conversation with Dr. Kwon through a system of medical signals not unlike the one he'd developed with Angel. That conversation lasted 3 separate sessions over 4 days. The plan was simple. Stay under. Use the coma as cover. Let Hana and the board members move, because people in motion leave evidence. Let Seok-hyun pull the financial threads from the outside while Woo Jun gathered what he could from inside the room. What no one had planned for was a rehabilitation nurse who noticed everything and talked about all of it out loud. Angel sat with that for a moment. Then she said the things I told him. About his wife, the portfolio man, the attorney visits. Every word, Dr. Kwon said. You were, without knowing it, his clearest picture of what was happening in this building. Angel was quiet, then, and the woman who came saying she was his cousin, the one you turned away at the door. Dr. Kwon nodded. Sent by Hana, to confirm he was still unresponsive. We believed she wanted visual confirmation before the next step. The next step being what? He looked at her steadily. We don't know exactly, which is why we are still moving carefully. Angel sat back. She looked at the wall for a moment. Then she said, I want to be clear about something. I am a nurse. I have obligations. I cannot knowingly withhold a patient's neurological status indefinitely. There are legal and ethical lines I am not willing to cross. I understand. So whatever window is left, it needs to close soon. Whatever Seok-Yoon is building, he needs to build it faster. Dr. Kwon said, he is aware he has a name, a man who was connected to the car that night. We are close. Angel looked at him. How close? Days, maybe a week. She stood up. She picked up her chart. She said, then I'll keep doing what I've been doing. She moved to the door. Then she stopped. She turned back. One more thing. Yes? He heard the Pinterest board conversation. Dr. Kwon blinked. I'm sorry. Never mind, she said. It's not relevant to the case. She went back to her rounds. Hana shifted her approach the following week. Angel noticed it the way she noticed everything. Not with alarm, just with attention. It started small. A comment in the corridor about how dedicated Angel was, how much it meant to the family. Then a coffee, left at the nurse's station with a card that said simply, thank you for your care. Then on a Thursday afternoon, Hana came in early, before her usual time, and stayed longer than 20 minutes, and she was warm. Or something performing warmth well enough that a less careful person might not have checked twice. She asked Angel questions, gentle ones, whether Woo-Jun seemed peaceful, whether there were any changes in how his body responded to stimulus, whether, in Angel's professional experience, patients in his condition could sometimes hear what was happening around them. Angel smiled. She answered everything in the most professionally neutral way imaginable. She used words like generally and in some studies, and every patient is different. She gave Hana exactly nothing that could be used, and wrapped it in enough warmth that Hana left looking satisfied. The moment the elevator doors closed, Angel's face reset. She went back to 4C. She sat down. She said, your wife tried to get information out of me today. I want you to know I gave her absolutely nothing useful, and I smiled the entire time. You're welcome. His fingers shifted toward her. She looked at them. I know, she said. I know. She stayed quiet for a moment then. She's getting nervous. People who are calm don't come in early and ask nurses questions about whether coma patients can hear. She's checking her timeline. She paused. Whatever Seok-Yoon is doing, he needs to know that. She made the call to Dr. Kwon from the stairwell that evening. 2 minutes. She told him what she'd observed. He said he would pass it on. She went back to her shift. She had 4 more patients to check before handover. She did them all thoroughly, without cutting anything short, because the people on her floor needed her the same as they always had, and nothing that was happening in 4C changed that. But her mind stayed in that room. The novel was one she'd been carrying in her bag for 2 months, a worn paperback that she kept meaning to start and kept not starting because she got home tired and sat on the couch, and the couch had a way of winning. She brought it into 4C on a Wednesday night when the floor was quiet and she had 40 minutes before handover. She said, I'm going to read to you, not because I think it'll help, just because I want to actually open this book and I'm not going to do it at home, so she opened it. She read 3 chapters out loud at a comfortable pace, not performing it, but not rushing it either. She read the way she talked, like she was thinking through it as she went, pausing when something was interesting, skipping over a sentence that didn't land and not apologizing for it. When she finished the 3rd chapter, she looked up. I don't know what happens after this, she said. When this is over, when you wake up. I don't know who you are when you're standing up. I know who you are in here. I know what makes something land differently in your face, and what makes your breathing change, and what times of day feel harder for you than others. She looked at the window. That's a strange kind of knowing, getting to know someone from the outside in. She looked back at him. I'm going to miss this room, she said, which is crazy because I genuinely hate the lighting in here and the radiator makes a sound like 2 people having an argument in a language neither of them speaks. She stopped. She watched his hand. His fingers moved. She looked at his hand for a long moment. She reached over and put her hand over his. Lightly, she didn't make it into anything. She just left it there until she felt him settle. She cried a little in the elevator on the way down, 3 floors. She was done by the time the doors opened. She told no one. The name came from Angel. She didn't know that's what it was when she said it. She was doing her afternoon round 3 days after the novel night, and she mentioned it the way she mentioned everything, casually, as part of the running commentary of the day. "There's a man who keeps coming to this floor," she said, adjusting his IV line. "Not a doctor, not a regular visitor. He came twice last week and once yesterday. He's always visiting someone in the room at the end of the corridor, but he takes the long way around every time, past your door." She made a note on his chart. "His name is Curtis Webb. I know because I checked the visitor log when it started bothering me. He signed in 3 times in 8 days, and each time he listed a different patient as his reason for being here." She set the chart down. "I'm probably overthinking it. I overthink things. My mother says it's my primary hobby." She sat down. "But I've been a nurse long enough to know when someone's walking a floor for a reason that has nothing to do with the patients on it." She moved on, talked about other things, left at the end of her shift. She had no way of knowing that the name Curtis Webb had just broken something open. Seo-kyun ran the name that same evening, Doctor. Kwon had passed it to him within 2 hours of Angel's visit, the way they had developed their system of communication. Careful, indirect, nothing written down that didn't need to be. Seo-kyun sat in his office on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Princeton and looked at what came back on Curtis Webb and felt something tighten in his chest. Curtis Webb, 41, former driver and logistics coordinator for a private transport company called Meridian Secure. He caught himself a private transport company with contracts that ran through several businesses connected to Hana's family. He had left that company 8 months ago, officially resigned, no public reason. 7 weeks before Woo Jun's accident, a car registered to Curtis Webb was reported stolen. The report was filed 2 days after the accident on Route 206. Seo-kyun sat with that for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and made a call to a contact at a private investigations firm he had used twice before, a man who was discreet in the specific way that money and necessity produce, and he said, "I need everything on Curtis Webb. Where he's been, who he's been paid by, and what he's been doing on the 3rd floor of Princeton Medical Center in the last 2 weeks. He had answers within 48 hours. Curtis Webb had received 3 wire transfers in the 4 months following Woo Jun's accident. The source was buried under 2 shell structures, but the trail was there for someone who knew where to look. The transfers totaled enough money to make a man stay quiet and stay close, and do whatever checking in he'd been paid to do." Seo-kyun called Dr. Kwon. Dr. Kwon told Angel the next morning in the stairwell, quietly, that the name she had mentioned had been significant. Angel leaned against the wall and said he was sent to check on him, to confirm he was still under. "Yes, by who? We believe by Hana, through an intermediary. We can't prove the chain directly yet, but Webb is the weak link. He's not a sophisticated man. He took the money and he's been nervous ever since." Angel thought about it. "If you approach him wrong, he disappears." "Yes. So you need something to approach him with. Something that makes the cost of staying quiet higher than the cost of talking." "Doctor." Kwon looked at her. "Seo-kyun is working on that." She nodded. "Okay." She pushed off the wall. "Tell him to work faster. Because I watched Hana in that room last Thursday, and she is not a patient woman, and she is building to something." She went back to her floor. Hana came in on a Monday at 9 p.m., which was outside every pattern she had ever established in 19 weeks of visits. Angel was at the nurse's station when she came off the elevator, and she watched her walk down the corridor with the particular attention of someone who has learned to read a situation from the way a person moves through a room. Hana moved differently tonight. Slower, less managed. She went into 4C without acknowledging Angel, which was not unusual, but she left the door slightly open, which was. Angel stayed at the station. She could hear nothing specific. But at the 11-minute mark she heard Hana's voice. Not the words, just the sound of it, lower than usual, stripped of the performance she normally carried. Hannah stayed 26 minutes. When she came out, her face was composed again, but something behind it was different. Something that looked, if Angel was being precise about it, like a door that had been closed for a long time. She walked past the nurse's station. She stopped. She looked at Angel. She said, "You've been very kind to him. I want you to know that I see that," Angel said. "It's my job." Hannah held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and walked to the elevator. Angel waited until the doors closed. She picked up her pen, set it back down, picked up her phone and typed a message to Dr. Kwon. She came in tonight 9 p.m., 26 minutes. Something has changed in her timeline. Whatever is happening needs to happen now. His reply came 4 minutes later. Seok-hyun moves tomorrow. Angel set her phone down. She looked at the corridor. She thought about what Hannah had said in that room. She'd heard the tone of it, even if not the words. She thought about what it sounds like when someone says goodbye to something they've already decided to let go of. She went into 4C after Hannah left. She sat down. She didn't say anything for a moment. Just sat there in the terrible lighting with the radiator doing its thing in the corner, and she let the room be what it was. Then she said, "She came to say goodbye to you. I don't know if you know that, but that's what that was." She looked at her hands, which means she thinks this is almost over, which means we are almost out of time. His fingers moved. Open, then closed, then open again. She looked at them. "I know," she said. "I know." She stayed until the overnight nurse came on. She briefed the handover thoroughly, professionally, every detail accounted for. She walked to the elevator. She stood in it going down, and she thought, tomorrow. Whatever tomorrow brings, it has to be tomorrow. She came in early. She didn't go home after her evening shift. She drove around Princeton for an hour, and then sat in the hospital parking lot until 5 a.m., and then went to the overnight break room and slept in a chair for 90 minutes and was back on the floor by 7. She looked, by her own assessment, terrible. She felt completely awake. "Doctor." Kwon found her at 7:15. He said, "It's done. Seok-hyun met with Webb last night." He cooperated. Angel said, "What did he give them?" "Enough. A name above him. A payment structure. The dates match. Seok-hyun's contact at a private firm has been building the financial case for 6 weeks. The asset movements, the board meetings Hannah attended under the cover of family concern. Emails from a server backup she believed had been wiped. He paused. Detective Webb, no relation, has been passed an anonymous tip. "He is moving this morning," Angel said. Dr. Kwon looked at her. "It's time." She nodded. She took a breath. She said, "Has he been told?" "We communicated through our system last night. I hope he recovers quickly." She nodded again. She picked up her chart. She said, "I hope he wakes up fast, before all these go sideways." She walked down the corridor to 4C. She pushed the door open. She sat down. She looked at him. She said, "Okay, today is the day, I think. Seok-hyun has what he needs. Detective Webb is moving on Hannah this morning. Dr. Kwon says it's time." She folded her hands. "I hope you get up soon and see this through. I hope you wake up to witness all these." Silence. She waited. She looked at his face, and she thought about every conversation she'd had in this room. She thought about the fact that she did not know what his voice sounded like. She was about to find out. At 7:14 a.m., Bang Woo-jun opened his eyes. Not a blink, not a reflex. He opened them the way a person opens their eyes when they have decided to fully, completely, and he turned his head. Slowly, because 19 weeks of stillness had costs that didn't disappear overnight. And he found her. She was already looking at him with shock, her mouth partly open, trying to find the right words. They stayed like that for a moment. Her, in the chair she had sat in every day for 5 weeks, and him, finally present, in the way she'd only ever been able to feel before but never see. He looked at her the way someone looks at a voice they have been given a face for, like adjusting, like recalibrating something important. She said, very quietly, "Good morning." His voice, when it came, was rough and low and barely there, the voice of a man who hadn't used it in 19 weeks. "But it worked. It carried," he said. "You have terrible taste in men." She stared at him. Then she laughed. She covered her face with both hands. She pulled herself together with the specific effort of a woman who has held herself together in harder rooms than this one. She lowered her hands. She looked at him. She said, "You were awake the whole time," he said. "Not the whole time." A pause, but enough. She looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "I need you to know that the Pinterest board conversation is something I will be processing for a very long time." Something happened to his face, not quite a smile, the beginning of one, the face of a man remembering how to make expressions. He said, "The kitchen sounds beautiful." She closed her eyes, opened them. "We are going to talk about boundaries," she said, "later. When you can physically sit up and defend yourself," he said, very quietly. "I look forward to it." The arrest happened at 8:47 a.m. Angel wasn't there for it. She was in room 4C, sitting across from a man who was learning how to be present in a room again, watching him relearn the small mechanics of existing, blinking fully, turning his head without wincing, breathing in a way that wasn't rationed. She was there for that instead, which felt like the right place to be. Detective Nathan Webb had been given everything he needed: the financial trail, Curtis Webb's cooperation and signed statement, the emails recovered from the server backup, the payment records connecting a private security consultant to Hannah's family accounts 8 months before the crash, 3 wire transfers, clean amounts, the kind of numbers that were big enough to buy silence and small enough not to trigger automatic flags. He had the name of the man who drove the car. He had dates and routes and a timeline that lined up with Route 206 at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday 14 weeks ago. He moved on the Woo Jun estate at 8:47 a.m. with 2 other detectives and a warrant. Hannah was having breakfast. She didn't make a scene. She set down her coffee cup. She looked at the warrant. She looked at Detective Webb. And then she stood up very calmly and said, "I'll need to call my attorney." She was the kind of woman who had planned for many possibilities. She just hadn't planned for the right timeline. The 2 board members were picked up separately, within the same hour. One of them, when the detectives arrived at his office, asked if there had been some kind of mistake. There had not been any kind of mistake. Seo-kyun watched from the parking lot of the estate, standing beside his car with his hands in his coat pockets. He had not slept in 31 hours. When his phone rang and it was Dr. Kwon telling him that Woo Jun was awake, he stood there for a moment, looking at the house and feeling something he couldn't immediately name. Then he got in his car and drove to the hospital. Woo Jun's new room was on a different floor, a private suite arranged quietly by Dr. Kwon in the hours after his emergence, with better light and furniture that didn't look like it was apologizing for existing. It was still a hospital room. But it was the kind of hospital room that understood it had a job to do and did it without making everyone miserable about it. Seo-kyun sat with him for an hour that first morning. Angel had stepped out. She had a floor to run and patients who needed her, and she had never been the kind of person to neglect one situation for another, regardless of how much the other situation felt like the center of everything. She heard later from Dr. Kwon that the hour between Woo Jun and Seo-kyun was very quiet. That Woo Jun asked questions and Seo-kyun answered them, and at some point, Woo Jun looked at the window for a long time without saying anything, and Seo-kyun let him. That was all Dr. Kwon said about it. That was probably all that needed to be said. Woo Jun called no one else that day. Not because there was no one to call. There were board members who needed to be informed, a communications team that needed to manage the public statement, lawyers beyond Seo-kyun who had been waiting for exactly this moment. There were structures and protocols and a company that had been running without its CEO for 19 weeks and had things to say about that. He knew all of this. He let it wait. There was one call he made himself in the late afternoon while the room was quiet. He picked up the phone by the bed. The first time he had held a phone in 5 months, and he called his daughter. Angel heard about that one from Iris directly 2 days later. Iris told her that her father had called. He said, "I'm still here, Iris." And that after that, neither of them spoke for almost a full minute, because sometimes a minute of silence between 2 people who love each other is more than enough. Iris told Angel this in the corridor outside the new room on a Tuesday afternoon, standing with her arms crossed and her chin up the way she always stood. Then she said, "He wants to see you," Angel said. "I know, Doctor. Kwan mentioned." Iris said, "Are you going to?" Angel said, "I'm trying to figure out the professional piece of it first." Iris looked at her steadily. "The professional piece of it is that you are no longer his nurse. You stepped back from his care the morning he woke up. I know that, so the professional piece is resolved." Angel looked at her. "You're very direct." "I got it from somewhere," Iris said, and walked away. Angel stepped back from Woo Jun's care the morning he woke up, formally and cleanly, the way she did everything. She documented it, recommended the physiotherapy team, briefed the incoming care staff thoroughly. She was professional about it in the specific way. That meant she put the professional part first, and everything else in a drawer she was not ready to open in a hospital corridor. She had a floor to run. She had patients who needed her. She had a rotating schedule and a cafeteria coffee that was finally working again after 2 weeks broken, which was its own small victory worth honoring. She did her work. She did it well. She did it the way she always had. But the drawer stayed in the back of her mind the way drawers do when you know what's in them and you're not sure what to do with it yet. She came in on her day off. She came in because she had told herself she was going to, and she was not a person who told herself things and then didn't do them. It wasn't in her nature. She found it inefficient. She wore her own clothes, which felt strange in this building. She took the elevator to the new floor. She stood in the doorway. He was sitting up. She had never seen him sitting up before. She had known him horizontal, completely still, for 5 weeks. Now he was upright, dressed in actual clothes, and the room rearranged itself around the fact of him being in it differently. He looked like a man who had been through something and had come out the other side not unchanged but intact. He looked like someone she had known for a long time without knowing what he looked like. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "You are shorter than I imagined," she said. "You are exactly as arrogant as your chart suggested." He smiled. It was the first time she had seen it, and it did something to the room she was not going to examine right now in a hospital doorway on her day off. She came in. She sat down in the chair across from the bed, not the bedside chair, the one at a slight distance, which she chose deliberately, and he noticed, she could tell he noticed. They sat like two people who knew each other very well and were now figuring out what that meant without the context that had contained it. She said, "How are you feeling, honestly?" He said, "Like 19 weeks of not moving." "That's accurate." "My hands are the worst," he said. "Everything else I expected. I didn't expect my hands." She nodded. "Fine motor control comes back slower. Give it 3 weeks with the physiotherapy team. Don't rush it." "I'm not good at not rushing things." "I know," she said. "You were getting better at it, honestly. Forced stillness will do that." He looked at her. "You're funny. You knew that already." "I knew your voice was funny," he said. "It's different seeing your face when you say something." She looked at her hands for a second, then back at him. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." "All right. When I was in that room before I knew, the things I told you, were they ever something you used? Information I gave you that you passed to Seok-hyun? Something that went into the case in a way that—" "No," he said. "It was immediate. Not defensive. Just clear. The information you gave me helped me understand what was happening in that building. The conversations between us, what you told me about yourself, that was never part of anything outside that room." She held his gaze. "I need to believe that." "I know," he said. "I'm not going to tell you that you have to. I'm going to tell you it's true and let you decide what to do with it." She sat with that for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Okay," he said. "Okay." A pause. Not uncomfortable. "Just two people letting something settle," she said. "The attorney who looked like he was holding water in his hands. That was Seok-hyun," he said. "He always looks like that, even when everything is fine." "Is everything fine now?" He thought about it. Really thought about it, which she appreciated. "No," he said, "but it's moving in the right direction." She nodded. "That's usually the best you can ask for." He looked at her. "What about you?" she said. What about me? You found out that a man you'd been talking to in confidence was conscious the entire time. That's not a small thing. How are you? She looked at him for a moment. Nobody had asked her that, not Dr. Kwon, not Seok-hyun, not Claudette, because she hadn't told Claudette the whole story yet. Nobody had thought to turn it around and ask how she was carrying what she was. Carrying, she said, I've been sitting with it, and I think the part that gets me isn't that you heard everything. It's that I meant everything. I wasn't performing anything in that room. I wasn't trying to be anything, I was just being. And that's the part that feels exposed, if I'm being honest. Not the specific things I said. Just that you got to see me being completely unguarded and I didn't get the same thing back. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's fair. I know it's fair. I'm a fair person. I know that too, he said. You told me. She almost smiled. I did, didn't I? Several times. She stood up. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She said, I have to go. I have things to do on my day off that I have been neglecting because I spent my last several day-offs in a hospital. He said, Will you come back? She looked at him. To check on you professionally? No, I'm off your case. That's not what I meant. I know what you meant. She held his gaze. I'll think about it. She left. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood there waiting, and she thought about the way he'd looked at her when she walked in. Like adjusting. Like recalibrating something important. And she thought about what it meant that the first thing she'd felt when she saw him sitting up was something that had nothing to do with nursing. The elevator opened. She got in. She was going to need to think about this very carefully. She thought about it for approximately 4 minutes. Then she took out her phone and sent a message to Dr. Kwon. Tell him I'll come back Thursday. She put her phone away. The elevator doors opened. She walked out into the Princeton afternoon and felt, for the first time in a long time, like something that had been unfinished was beginning to find its ending. Claudette called that evening, the way she called every evening, reliable as medication. Angel picked up. She said, Mama, I need to tell you something. Claudette said, Are you okay? I'm fine. I'm good, actually. I need to talk to someone, and you're the only person I trust with it. Then talk to me. So Angel told her, all of it. From the first night in 4C, to the blink, to Dr. Kwon's office, to the morning Woo Jun woke up and said she had terrible taste in men. She told it the way she told things when she wasn't managing anyone's reaction. All the way through, without stopping, with the feeling still attached to the facts. When she finished, Claudette was quiet. Then she said, So the man you've been talking to for weeks is a Korean billionaire who was in a coma and is now in love with you. Angel said, He is not in love with me, Mama. Claudette said, Baby, he memorized your Pinterest board. That doesn't mean. He lay completely still for 5 weeks listening to your voice, and the first thing he said to you when he woke up was about your dating life. That man is in love with you. Angel said, You are not a reliable narrator of this situation. Claudette said, I am the only reliable narrator of any situation involving you and men. You have a blind spot the size of New Jersey. Angel opened her mouth. Closed it. Get some sleep, Claudette said, and call me Thursday. Recovery, it turned out, was not a single event. It was a series of small, unglamorous battles that nobody filmed and nobody applauded. And that happened in the same room every day until they didn't need to happen anymore. Woo Jun was not a good patient. Not difficult exactly, not rude, just resistant to the pace of things. He wanted his hands to work on day 3, and they didn't work the way he wanted on day 3. He wanted to walk the length of the corridor without assistance on day 5 and his physiotherapist, a calm woman named Dr. Lena Park he stopped himself. A calm woman named Dr. Lena who had the specific patience of someone who had dealt with powerful men, convinced that determination alone could override muscle atrophy, told him plainly that his timeline and his body's timeline were 2 different timelines and only one of them was negotiable. He did not find this easy to hear. He heard it anyway. Seok-hyun came every other day. They worked through what needed working through. The company, the board, the public statement that had gone out the morning after his emergence. and had broken every business news outlet in the Northeast. Sun Capital's stock moved in ways that analysts spent 3 days trying to explain. Woo Jun read their explanations from his hospital bed and found them mostly wrong in the specific way that people who analyze things from outside are always wrong about what actually drives decisions. He signed things, he made calls. He held a video meeting with the senior leadership team on day 6 while sitting up in the hospital bed with his jacket on, because Seok-hyun had suggested it and Woo Jun had said absolutely not, and then put his jacket on anyway because some habits are structural. The 2 board members had retained separate attorneys and were releasing separate statements that contradicted each other in ways that were going to make both of their legal situations significantly worse. Seok-hyun watched this with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had waited a long time to see something come apart cleanly. Hana said nothing publicly. Her attorney said nothing publicly. The silence was the loudest thing about her. Woo Jun did not speak about Hana. Not to Seok-hyun, not to Dr. Kwon, not in any of the calls or meetings or signed documents. Not yet. There was a legal process, and it would move at the speed it moved, and he had spent 19 weeks being still. He could wait a little longer. He talked about it once, to Angel, on a Thursday. She came back Thursday the way she said she would, because she said she would, and she was a woman who did what she said. She came in the early afternoon, her own clothes again. A coffee from the place 2 blocks from the hospital that was better than anything the building offered, and she sat down in the chair at a slight distance the way she had the first time. He said, "You came," she said. "I said I would, I know. I just." He stopped. "I'm still adjusting to things happening the way I expect them to." She looked at him. "Was that a problem before? Things not happening the way you expected," he said. "I ran a company for 20 years. I got very good at predicting outcomes. And people." A pause. "People were harder," she nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said. "They usually are." She drank her coffee. He watched her, not in a way that felt intrusive, just in the way of someone still recalibrating the face to the voice. She let him look. She wasn't uncomfortable with being seen. She had decided that on the elevator ride up. She said, "Tell me about Hana." He didn't answer immediately. She didn't push. She just waited the way she waited for things, without performing the waiting. He said, "We met at a fundraiser in Seoul, 18 years ago." She was, I don't have a simple word for what she was, magnetic, precise. She wanted things in a way that felt at the time like ambition, like drive. He looked at the window. "It took me a long time to understand that the thing she wanted most was the thing she couldn't get while I was still alive." Angel said, "Did you love her?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "For a long time, yes. And when did that change?" "Slowly," he said. "The way things change when nobody says them out loud. You look up one day, and the distance between 2 people has become the whole relationship, and you don't remember exactly when it happened." Angel was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry, for that part of it. Whatever she did or didn't do, losing a marriage is still a loss." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted the way it had shifted in 4C, the way she recognized now even on a face that could actually move. He said, "You're the first person who has said that. People probably figured you were too angry to need the other part. Are they wrong?" "I don't know," she said. "Are they?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "But it doesn't mean the other part isn't also true." She nodded. She looked at her coffee cup. She said, "For what it's worth, I think the version of you I met in that room was more honest than the version you probably walk around as out here. And I mean that as something good," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when a person thinks no one is listening, they become a certain kind of real. And what I heard in that room, what I felt in that room, was someone who was in genuine pain and genuinely present and genuinely." She stopped. "Herself," he said. "Genuinely what?" She looked at him. "Listening," she said. "Genuinely listening," which sounds simple, but it isn't. Most people are just waiting to talk. "You actually listened," he said. "I didn't have another option." "No," she said. "But how you did it was still a choice." He held her gaze. "You do that thing," he said. She said, "What thing?" "Where you say something precise and true, and then pull back from it before it lands fully." Like you know what you're about to mean and you decide at the last second to stop short, she said. That's very specific. I had 5 weeks to learn your patterns. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, that is still the strangest sentence anyone has ever said to me. He said, I know. A pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that two people share when they are both aware that something is being said underneath the conversation they are having out loud, and neither of them is ready to say it above the surface yet. She finished her coffee. She said, how are your hands today? Better than Tuesday. Show me. He held up his right hand and moved his fingers slowly with visible effort. Better than Tuesday was accurate. Not where it needed to be, but moving in the right direction. She nodded. Another week and you'll have most of it back. Don't overdo the exercises. I know you're overdoing the exercises. Dr. Lena has mentioned this. Dr. Lena is right. She stood up. I have to go. I'm meeting my mother for dinner, and she will call me every 15 minutes if I'm late, he said. What are you going to tell her? About? He gestured between them, which was maybe more than he'd intended to gesture. She looked at the gesture, looked at him. She said, I told her the whole story already. He said, everything? Everything. And what did she say? Angel picked up her jacket, she said. She said you memorized my Pinterest board. He said nothing. She watched him not say nothing in a specific way. She said, I'll be back Tuesday, and walked out. Tuesday she came in and he had something for her. Not a gesture, not a thing. Information. He said, I want to tell you what I heard. In the room, if you want to know. She sat down. She said, tell me. So he told her. Not the wife conversations. Not the attorney visits. She knew those. He told her the other parts. The night she talked about her father, and he had lain in the dark thinking about Iris and the specific complicated love of parents who don't get it right and children who find a way to carry it anyway. The night she described the patient who walked to the window, and he had felt, for the first time since the accident, something that worked like hope. The night she read to him, and the room was just a room with 2 people in it, and for 40 minutes nothing outside of that existed. She listened to all of it. When he was done, she said, you should know that I'm not a romantic person. I'm practical. I'm logical. I think feelings are real, but I also think they need to be examined before you act on them, because feelings without examination are just weather. He said, I know, you told me. I'm reminding you now in a context where you can actually respond. He said, and what does the examination tell you? She looked at him. That this is unusual. That the way we know each other is completely backwards from how people normally know each other. That I know things about you that most people who've been with someone for years don't know yet. And you know things about me that I haven't even said out loud to myself in a full sentence. She paused, and that backwards isn't the same as wrong. He was quiet. Then he said, no, it isn't, she said. I'm not going to rush this. I know, and you're still in a hospital bed. I'm aware. So, she sat back. When you can walk to the end of the corridor without holding the wall, we can have dinner, he said. That's your benchmark. That's my benchmark, he said. I walked to the window this morning, she said. The corridor is longer than the window, he said. Give me 4 days, she said. You have a week. Don't injure yourself on my account. That would be embarrassing for both of us. He looked at her, and this time the smile came fully, and she let herself feel it for exactly as long as it took her to stand up and pick up her jacket. She said, Tuesday, he said, Tuesday. He walked the corridor in 5 days. She found out from Dr. Lena, who mentioned it with the professional satisfaction of someone whose patient had done the thing the patient was supposed to do. Angel said, how far? Dr. Lena said, full length, both ways. He was at the wall twice, but he didn't stop. Angel said, that's good. Dr. Lena looked at her. He did ask me afterward whether that qualified as walking without holding the wall. Angel kept her face neutral. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know the context of the question. A pause. He seemed to feel it was borderline. It's borderline, Angel agreed, but I'll give it to him. Dr. Lena nodded once and went back to her rounds. Angel went back to hers. She spent the rest of the shift being exactly as present for her patients as she always was, because they needed her to be, and because she was not a person who gave anything less than what was needed. But somewhere underneath all of it was something warm and steady that had not been there before, or had been there and not had a direction, and now it did. She texted him that evening. She had his number from a professional handover document and had not used it for anything other than one check-in about medication compliance 3. Days after his emergence, she typed, "Dr. Lena told me about the corridor. Borderline, but it counts. Dinner when you're discharged." She put her phone down. She made dinner. She ate it sitting at her kitchen table with the lights on this time. Her phone buzzed. He had written, 4 days. She wrote back, "We'll see." He wrote, "We will." She put her phone face down on the table and smiled at her dinner like it had done something to deserve it. He was discharged on a Thursday morning, 11 days after he woke up, which was faster than Dr. Kwon had projected and exactly as fast as Woo Jun had decided it was going to be from the moment he understood what discharged meant in terms of dinner. Angel was not there for the discharge. She was on shift, floor 3, with 4 patients who needed her. She found out from Dr. Kwon, who mentioned it the way he mentioned most things, quietly, with the economy of a man who believed that information delivered calmly landed better than information delivered with ceremony. She said, "Good, he needed to go home." Dr. Kwon said, "He asked me to give you something." He handed her a folded piece of paper. She looked at it. She looked at Dr. Kwon. He had already turned away and was walking back down the corridor with the specific posture of a man who was not going to be available for questions about the piece of paper. She unfolded it in the stairwell alone between floors. It said, "Thursday, 7 o'clock, I'll send the address. Wear something you feel like yourself in." She stood in the stairwell for a moment. Then she folded it back up, put it in her scrubs pocket, and went back to her floor. She told Claudette that evening, because she told Claudette everything eventually, and Claudette said, "Wear something you feel like yourself in," like she was reading scripture. She said, "Angel, that man." Angel said, "Don't." Claudette said, "I'm just saying." Angel said, "I know what you're saying, and I'm asking you not to say it." Claudette said, "He said wear something you feel like yourself in, not wear something nice, not dress up. Wear something you feel like yourself in. Baby, that's a man who has been paying attention." Angel said, "Good night, Mama." She wore a deep rust-colored dress she'd had for 2 years and only worn twice because she kept saving it for the right occasion and hadn't been able to decide what the right occasion was. She looked at herself in the mirror before she left and thought, this is what feeling like yourself looks like. She took her own car. The address was not what she expected. She had built a mental image, without meaning to, of something that announced itself, something with a view and a reservation, and the kind of menu that didn't have prices on it. Something that said, "I am a billionaire, and this is how a billionaire asks a woman to dinner." It was a restaurant on a quiet street in Princeton that she had walked past 100 times and never gone into. Small, 12 tables. The kind of place that looked like it wasn't trying to be anything, which was how you knew it was actually something. She stood outside it for a second. He was already inside. She could see him through the window, sitting at a corner table, actually sitting up under his own power in actual restaurant furniture, and the sight of it, of him out in the world in a jacket at a table, hit her somewhere unexpected. She stood on the pavement for one breath, then she went in. He stood when she came in, which she hadn't anticipated, and the standing cost him something. She could see it in the small adjustment he made, but he stood anyway. She crossed to the table. She sat down. He sat down. She said, "You didn't have to stand," he said. "I wanted to," she said. "How are your hands?" He held up his right hand and moved all 5 fingers cleanly, fully, without effort. She nodded. "Good," she said. "Dr. Lena will be pleased." He said, "Dr. Lena already knows. She makes me send her daily updates. Smart woman, relentless woman," he said. "But yes." The waiter came. They ordered. And then they were just 2 people at a table with menus and water glasses, and the ordinary beautiful fact of a meal, and Angel felt the shift of it. From everything they had been to whatever this was, and let it happen without trying to manage it. He said, "I want to ask you something," she said. Okay. In the room, the night you read to me. You said you were going to miss it, the room. He looked at her. Did you mean that? She thought about the honest answer versus the safe answer. She chose the honest one because she always chose the honest one eventually, and there was no point delaying it. She said, "Yes, I meant it," which surprised me because I meant it even before I knew you could hear it, which means I wasn't saying it for you. I was saying it because it was true. He said, "What did you miss about it?" She looked at him. The quality of being known without being watched. She said, "I could be completely myself in that room, and there were no consequences to it. No one adjusting their perception of me. No one deciding what my honesty meant about me." She paused, and then it turned out someone was listening the whole time, which should have made that feeling a lie, but it didn't, because the way you listened. She stopped. He said, "Say it." She said, "The way you listened didn't change anything about what I was saying. You just held it. You didn't do anything with it except hold it. And I've never had that before." Not really. The food arrived. They ate. They talked about things that had nothing to do with hospitals or comas or arrests or financial forensics. He asked about her patients, not specific ones, just what it was like to do what she did, and she told him honestly, the good and the hard and the parts in between. She asked about the company, about what it was like to walk back into something that had been running without you, and he told her that too. The disorientation of it, the specific strangeness of a company that had learned to function around your absence, she said. "Does that bother you? That it kept running?" He said, "It should probably bother me more than it does." A pause. "What it actually tells me is that I built something real. Real things don't collapse when one person steps away," she said. "That's a generous way to look at it," he said. "I had 19 weeks to work on being generous." She laughed, the real one. He watched it happen and she let him. They argued about the novel she had read to him. He had opinions about it, which she found both surprising and entirely unsurprising. She had different opinions. They disagreed with the specific energy of two people who are enjoying disagreeing more than they would enjoy agreeing, which said everything about what was happening at that table, and neither of them said it out loud. Because some things don't need to be said out loud, to be completely understood. At some point, she looked at him across the table and she thought, "I knew this person before I knew his face. I knew the weight of him before I knew his voice. I knew what moved him before I knew what he looked like when he moved. And now here he is, across a table in a restaurant on a quiet street, and he is exactly who I thought he was, and also completely new. And both of those things are true at the same time." She didn't say any of that. She said, "The ending of that book is wrong," he said. "The ending is the best part," she said. "The ending is a cop-out and you know it," he said. "I know nothing of the sort," she said. "You spent 19 weeks in a bed. You have been conditioned to find stillness satisfying. That's why you like the ending. It's still." He stared at her. Then he said, "That is the most creative misreading of literary preference I have ever heard." She said, "I'm a creative person." He said, "I know. You have a Pinterest board." She pointed at him. "We are not doing the Pinterest board tonight," he said. "We're going to have to do it eventually." "Eventually," she said. "Not tonight." He conceded this with the expression of a man who had chosen his battles and was comfortable with this particular retreat. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of Angel and Woo Jun's journey, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story on this channel. And drop a comment telling me, at what moment did you know he was falling for her? I want to read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.